Good morning. I'm Mark Allen with Caper.io, and I'm here today with David Ferris, the CEO and co-founder of Phonic.AI. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Just back up here in Toronto from the Bay Area. Just working away.
Cool. So can you share a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
Yeah, happy to. I am a recent engineering grad from the University of Waterloo. Did various internships in tech, worked at Google for a little bit, got my startup fix at places like 53 in Athos, in Seattle and the Bay Area. And pretty much right after graduating, started a tech company. We started Phonic. Phonic is a voice AI company. Our first product is a survey product that allows you to, instead of answering with text, you can answer with your voice. And there's all kinds of interesting NLP and voice analytics that you can do when you have access to voice data. So I've kind of meandered throughout tech throughout my very young career. But I feel like, we're really in a good spot here with Phonic.
Cool. So what has been your experience with remote employment?
It's been a fairly, I wouldn't say I've had a ton of experience with remote employment, more or less just using Upwork and Fiverr and a little sprinkling of Mechanical Turk for the odd project. We haven't hired a remote team before, but I will say it's been quite positive. My co-founder and I, we really have a strong engineering background, but it means that we lack sometimes the design skills or some of these other things that are necessary to have that well-rounded startup. And so everything from the graphics on our landing page to our the UX of our web app, a large part of it was designed using these remote work platforms.
Oh, very cool. So, and what was your takeaway from that? Did it seem to work out well?
It did. It was a really positive experience. I always suspected that the value of remote work, there's this sort of, or at least I had this perception that remote work, you kind of get, mixed bag in terms of quality, but that it's always pretty cheap. And one of the things that surprised me is that there is like world-class remote work, still sort of with great value. And so particularly when it came to the design work, I was shocked at how good it was. Mm-hmm. And it's something that, because it's worked so well for us in the past, we've just continued to lean on, especially when you're an engineer with a technical background. You can probably twist and hack your way into a design that works, but for us, it's just been such a time saver to just, pay a couple of bucks and then immediately get that super high quality design. Yeah. And it seems to be playing, for my work, I worked at Uber for a little bit, and Uber has a pretty strong remote culture. So I was working, half the team was out of an office in Palo Alto and half the team was out of San Francisco. And even though it's only an hour apart, you still need a strong remote culture. And so It does seem to be playing a larger role in these kind of tech workplaces, especially with COVID. That's just accelerating everything.
Yeah. And as you know, San Francisco and Palo Alto are more than an hour apart in rush hour.
It's true. It depends what time of day, I guess.
That 101 backs up pretty bad.
Seriously.
So what do you think is the future of remote employment, and what do you think can be done differently to make it more effective?
Yeah, it's a good question. I probably don't have enough experience with remote employment to answer this fully. But one of the things that I'm really interested in, and one of the things that I've seen value in, are these platforms. So, Fiverr and Upwork are kind of the low-hanging fruit of remote work, because it's these sort of one-off tasks that can be outsourced really easily. But at Uber, we used to talk about the sort of power of the platform, referring to these network effects and efficiencies and economies of scale that happens when everything is on one platform and there's this kind of matching marketplace. And so I do feel like as these platforms become more sophisticated and you can start hiring, longer term contracts and entire teams through them, I feel like the experience of remote work is going to be, it's just going to keep on getting better and better, and more people will do it. Certainly for someone who just went through their first sort of remote work experience, that first step is sort of the scariest, because you're not entirely sure what you're going to expect. You're not entirely sure what the process is. And it does feel like it's this very relationship-based thing where you need to know someone who knows someone. Mm. But when you have these platforms that, reviews and portfolios and ratings and all the other stuff that comes with platforms, I think that that can make it a lot more accessible for a company like us, where it's just a few person startup, but still moving really quickly and you need to get things out the door.
Yeah, very cool. So what is the story behind Phonic.AI? What's the product? Who's your target audience? Things like that.
Sorry, Mark, you just cut out there for a second. Do you mind repeating that?
Yeah. So what is the story behind Phonic.AI? What's your product? Who's your target audience? Things like that.
It's a good question. Phonic.AI has a really unusual story. So we started it in college, and it was sort of a slightly different idea. Every startup goes through a number of pivots. And we actually participated in this accelerator called the Holt Prize. It's this student entrepreneurship program. There's about 50,000 student teams that participate globally. And through a series of qualifications and pitching competitions, we ended up participating in this accelerator, which is sort of the top 50 teams. And everybody goes to this castle in the UK and receives startup coaching and mentorship. And at that point, Phonic became, or turned really from just a student team side project into a full-fledged company. And so that journey took us, we ended up pitching for $1 million in seed funding at the UN. And then that launched us into YC. So we applied and were accepted into the Y Combinator Winter 20 batch. That batch just concluded. Was fundraising. Was a bit of an unusual experience, but essentially Holt Prize through Y Combinator, we've just been continuing to refine and improve tech. And so, as I mentioned before, Phonic is a voice AI company, and we build sort of surveys that you can answer with your voice.
Interesting. So someone would get a link, and you would just answer the question in natural language.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a bunch of advantages to answering. I mean, surveys is sort of a pretty tired idea. And there's this concept of survey fatigue. And we've all experienced, you get a link to a survey and you're dreading taking it. But when you allow people to answer with their voice, a bunch of interesting things happen. One is that survey fatigue is reduced. You get longer, higher quality responses with more descriptive adjectives. You tend to reduce survey bias because people who aren't really interested in answering your survey are much less likely to answer with their microphone, and people who are actually interested in giving you feedback give you higher quality feedback. And then there's all kinds of interesting, my co-founder has a strong AI background, and there's all kinds of interesting natural language processing that you can do when you actually have the audio file. There's some estimations that tone of voice contains up to 5 times more information than the text alone. And so a traditional survey where you just enter in a text box or answer multiple choice is leaving tons of information on the table.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you're right. Most surveys, if you think about it, are multiple choice, probably because it's easier to disseminate the responses, but you do lose a lot of information.
Exactly, you do. And so certainly multiple choice, that sort of quantitative research is important. And, voice will never replace, your standard multiple choice, but there are certain applications where you have an open-ended response and you really just want someone's open-ended, unstructured feedback. And so in that place, it makes a lot more sense to give them a lower friction way to respond. And they're not trained to give you that 140 character response. And so you end up getting really rich responses.
What could you be referring to there? So the current situation with the ongoing pandemic caused a lot of companies to shut down. You personally had to go from the Bay Area to Toronto. Did this cause any major roadblocks or challenges for your company?
It has. I mean, I think one of the important, not just important, one of the critical things that a startup needs to have is momentum and the sort of high energy, high octane environment that comes with that momentum, that growth. And it's been really important for us to try and preserve that as much as possible, even as our team has spread apart and had to go to remote work. And so I think that has been a little bit of a challenge, is trying to keep up the momentum and keep morale high while everyone is not necessarily co-located. That said, we had a little bit of experience with that. And so we have an intern who, he knows this, but he's sort of been a little bit of an experiment for us culturally and also with remote work. So he was from UCSC and he was doing remote work for us. And I was really interested to see how this would work, where he's not working on some project on the moon. He's actually tightly integrated with our team and working in the exact same code base as we are. And so in some ways, through having this remote intern, we had already been practicing remote work and good habits around that. And so when the lockdown struck and we had to, we can no longer work out of the same place, we sort of had all these good habits. And so it wasn't too difficult, but it's definitely top of mind for me, is like keeping the momentum high and not letting things lull.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because you have a very interesting product, and it's kind of like you just got off the ground and the whole world comes to a halt.
Exactly, yeah. And so like we have to in-house all our own tech because it's extremely sort of research focused. And research teams, probably even more so than like conventional product or engineering teams, really help, like they benefit from being in the same place and being able to whiteboard things. And so it's been like an extra hurdle for us to jump, but I'm curious to see what happens when we all get back together eventually, and to see if, if we become even more sort of productive and our velocity increases further, or if we'll want to sort of, keep our distance a little bit because we'll have, we've developed all these habits. So
yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, no, I agree. So there's companies like Gaper that help develop, build, and scale products, especially for startups like yourself. And you've already had some experience with this. We talked about the UX part. Right? How important do you think that is going forward for companies like yourself that need to hire really the right talent and in a hurry?
Yeah, it's probably quite critical. Hiring is, I think Steve Jobs said, the first 10 employees really define a startup. And so hiring, particularly at our size and our stage, is probably the most important thing we do. It's the most important decisions we make. And so having access to a larger talent pool when you consider remote work is potentially advantageous. And I used to back at the Hult Prize, we used to work with a startup called Boundless, and they were a remote work company, and they were brilliant people, former Google and McKinsey. But most importantly is 2/3 of their team were from Kazakhstan, and they had relationships with these top academic, technical institutions in Kazakhstan. And so their remote work company, they actually paired Silicon Valley tech companies with super, strong, competent Kazakhstani engineering teams. And in some ways that is like, these nodes are so separate, like Silicon Valley tech company, Kazakh graduate, those nodes would never get matched up normally. But through this agency, Boundless, they were able to create, incredible value for people. And this opportunity only existed because they were this particular unique founding team that had this really special relationship and skill set. And so, yeah, I think that sort of like network and that sort of relationship is super critical for hiring good remote teams.
Yes. Well, David, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been very interesting. I hope you get back to the Bay Area soon. Maybe we can get together and have a coffee or a beer, whatever, whichever one is your preference.
Either one works for me.
All right, cool. Yeah, we live pretty close to each other, so I know a couple good places we can go for both. And have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Bye.